Hello, and welcome to tonight's conversation. Healing starts at home. I'm going to be talking to my friend Dan Galvin, and we're going to get to Dan in a bit. But in the meantime, I've got several things that I want to talk to you about. One is over the next few days, in our campaign, we're going to do some stuff, handing out door hangers in Oil City, Cherry Valley, Eau Claire, and Emlenton. If you want to get involved, then reach out to the campaign. You can do that through our webpage at Mike4PA64.com. That's Mike FORPA64.com. We're going to be doing some guerrilla advertising in the district starting this week. I think this is probably something that hasn't happened in Pennsylvania 64. We're going to hit Oil City, Franklin, and maybe some of the other towns this week and weekend. If you got any places in mind where you'd like to see something like this pop up, then again, reach out and contact the campaign. I'm also excited to be working with Oil Region DSA and some students from Cranberry High School. It's really exciting to me to be working with young people. This is their future, so and it's just really exciting to be working with them. And young people rub off on me. They get me doing all kinds of things I wouldn't normally be doing. We just put a campaign commercial on YouTube. Look for it. It's called Poke Strong. We're also going to be doing hoping to be doing some advertising on cable so we can show off that commercial and another one we've got. To do that, we're going to need to get some additional funding. If you can kick in some bucks, that'd be great. Again, visit our webpage, Mike4PA64.com, and click on Donate. We also are always in need of volunteers. We need poll workers on election day. We need folks to augment our crackerjack crew of phone bankers. So if you can get involved, visit the webpage and let us know. If you didn't catch, we did something pretty cool last week, and that was with the DSA folks and also with the Cranberry High folks. We paid a visit to Representative Lee James's office. Lee, I've been to his office twice in Seneca and once in Harrisburg, and both times asked for, or all three times asked for a debate. He's been reluctant. I mean, he just doesn't give me an answer at all. So we took the debate to him. We went with about 10 people to his office, and we brought him 3 silver platters. You can watch that event on our Facebook page. It was pretty fun. It was a nice thing. Also, if you didn't catch it recently, I published a piece in Medium. That's medium.com. You can find a link for it on our Facebook page and also on Twitter. I've also appeared in a number of national podcasts. I did one this afternoon. Check out our Facebook page. It's on there. Also, talking about people dragging me, young people dragging me into the future. Alex, a young man that I have been working with, has dragged me into Instagram, and I've been posting videos there. That's Mike, the number 4, PA64. That's my Instagram name. And check out Twitter. I had 300 some followers when this all started. I got well over 1,000 now. So check us out. I guess at this point, I want to say, remember that this is not about me. I'm the face of this campaign, but this campaign is all about building the infrastructure for systemic change. We need we need to change how we do stuff. This is all about building a movement. That's why I'm so excited to start working with Oil Region DSA and the kids from Cranberry. Also a shout out to my friends at Indivisible We Rise in West Central Pennsylvania, and Our Revolution in Butler. We are working at building something different. We're trying to get away from the old system. As a community organizer and as someone who's been screwed over by politicians my entire life, I believe in grassroots democracy. And that means that it's not about the politician. It's about the politician listening to the people who would be governed. So let's build that movement, which leads me directly to tonight's conversation. I'm really excited about this. Dan is someone that I am really proud to call friend. He's a veteran of the Second Iraq War, the American War in Iraq, having joined the military right after his senior year of high school, the same year as the events of September 11th, 2001. He attained the rank of sergeant and received multiple honors during his 3 years of active duty before returning to society and attending college. He now works in education, which is another reason I admire him. And he worked with reading, which is also another reason, because that's where I came from, a teacher and a reading specialist, to be precise. And in Dan's spare time, he's involved in community work, opposing militarism and racism, both at home and abroad. I first met Dan when a bunch of us were putting together an Earth Day program in Diamond Park in downtown Butler. My friend Ellen Barfield had impressed upon me how important it was, if you're going to address climate change, then you need to address the military. And I don't remember how it came to be, but somebody in our group, might have been me, but it might have been somebody else, reached out and we found Dan. And wow, we were lucky. So we somehow connected with Dan, and I'm just thrilled that we're still connected. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you for all those kind words. I hope I can live up to them.
I know you can. So Dan, you know, one of the main themes that we're emphasizing in this campaign is community. What's your take?
So I think that that's a really important theme and concept that often gets kind of overlooked when it comes to politics, whether it be electoral politics or otherwise. I think egocentric, very tends to focus on independence and not so much on interconnectedness. And then also, my experiences in the military have kind of given me different ways to think about community. And also, as I kind of am going through the process of like healing old wounds and self-improvement, we see the importance of community in improving the individual in collaboration with others. So I think a lot of times people talk about joining the military as they're leaving their community to go defend their community, whatever concepts or words that they want to use. But actually, in a lot of ways, for some people, sometimes joining the military is their first time actually encountering a community. I don't mean necessarily to idealize the military. I think there's a lot of really terrible trauma and abuse that goes through the process of military training, being involved with such things, not to mention the fact that participating in imperialism, participating in the taking of resources from others, in supporting death and destruction, has its own form of moral injury. But there are aspects of military life that are a little bit different than what we become accustomed to in American society. That concept of communal living. When you're in the field, in the military, when you're deployed, you're depending on other people. You're living with other people, and sometimes in very close quarters. You have to share things in order to go through the just accomplish the things that need to be accomplished in order to continue to put one foot in front of the other and get through the day. And it's one of those, and because of sometimes the dangerous circumstances, you know, you have to get to a point where you're trusting other people with your lives and asking them to trust you. And so that is really like that's community in the utmost, right? Once again, not forgetting the fact that what has forged that community is something that at its heart is actually very damaging in the long run, both to the people who are involved, because it's being taken away from them after the fact, and also the fact that the US military is also destroying communities, whether it be the communities that are destroyed in Iraq, the communities that are destroyed in the various wars and dronings that we participate in South and in America, in Africa, and the Middle East, or the economic sanctions that are destroying communities. But in terms of the lifestyle of interdependence that people encounter when they're in the military, I'm reminded of the work of Sebastian Junger, who writes about this extensively. And basically what he says is that, for every war since the Civil War, the intensity of the combat has gone down, but disability rates have gone up. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have produced a third of the casualty rates of Vietnam, but 3 times the disability rates. Half of our military has filed for PTSD compensation, despite the fact that only 10% of people in the military have undergone combat. And so these are the things that I want us to keep in mind, and not idealize the military as something that is giving people, something that is lacking at home. I think the communal aspects that sometimes are encountered in the military need to be brought home in order to create a healing environment in which the military is not needed.
What are you talking about there, Dan? You started to talk about it, but what kind of communal things are you talking about?
So I would say that I'm thinking about specifically around dependency, right, and interdependency. In American political life, the term dependent is looked at as a dirty word, and not even in the political realm. In American society in general. We value independence, and we value strength, and we value resilience to be able to get through things without depending upon each other. But that's not actually biologically true if you look at the way human society is structured and has been structured. I'm thinking about attachment theory, and there's a great book by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller called Attached. And they write about the fact that attachment principles teach us that most people are only as needy as their most unmet needs. And when their emotional needs are met, and the earlier the better, they usually turn their attention outward. And so the more effectively dependent we become on each other, the more independent and daring people become. And so basically, if people can learn to become dependent upon each other, and that can become normalized, and the mechanisms exist to provide a trust in that dependency being met, and that the dependency will be supported, then actually people will become more resilient, more caring, more willing to risk. So that's why when this myth of capitalism and people wanting to generate money and that sense that people are driven by independence and self advancement, that doesn't actually bear out when people study kind of the biology of what causes people to succeed and thrive, as well as just sociology and what causes communities to become the most healthy.
You were talking about dependency, and yet that seems, I know from reading and also from talking to you that this isn't true, but that seems to fly right in the face of the myth of the soldier. We think of our soldiers as being, just like single entities going out to fight the enemy. But what you're saying is that's not true?
Yeah, so the whole army of one branding is a myth, right? And so, when I was in Iraq, and when I was in Iraq, I was living closer with people and interacting with people in such a way that you know we have our rhythms had to be kind of like become enmeshed, and that's actually a healthy thing. Again, going back to attachment theory. Emotional co-regulation is something that isn't often discussed. You might not even know what that term means, but basically it's the concept that when people are in relationship to each other, regardless of whether that relationship is, and people spend close proximity with each other, they're able to kind of sort of like smooth out some of the stresses. And it actually, they find that people's health increases the less isolated they are. And so when people, a lot of times soldiers will come back and from being in the field or being in a war zone and talk about and complain about the fact that, like, oh, we were in such close quarters and I had one pair of socks and we had to share boots or whatever. And basically that there wasn't enough material comfort, but that lack of material comfort is what forced an interdependency, and it forced a sharingness. And so while these soldiers might be talking about this as like, oh, it was so rough, but it forged, I have friends for life because of that. Well, that friends for life thing, that is what people, a lot of times soldiers will long for, because when they come back to our society is alienating. Our society is traumatized. There's so much about the way American society is set up that creates trauma, from an early age, and disproportionate trauma to people who face various oppressions. And then because of some of the myths about what is valued in our society, it does not provide the outlet for healing of that trauma. And some of the things that get in the way of that are racism, our patriarchy, our capitalism, the fact that we're not expected to do anything unless there's a material benefit that's given. These are creating the systems whereby people are not allowed to be freely interdependent and dependent on each other in a way, as well as to feel safe relying and opening it up and being vulnerable. And so that makes returning back to society difficult for soldiers, particularly for those who are facing PTSD. But I would posit that it makes life hard for anyone who goes through the trauma that is so often a part of life in American society.
Yeah. One of the things, when I talked to you just before this program, not today, but a few days ago, you turned me on to, and you already mentioned him, Sebastian Younger. And he talked about the problem a lot of soldiers have coming home is that there's something missing. And what he talks about is a lot of, they say how hard it was, but then where would you rather be? And a lot of them say they'd rather be back where they were in horrible conditions, that we would think of as horrible conditions, but there's something else. And he asked the question, what's different? And I'm going to read this. He said, what's different? And then he said, in the field, it's cooperation rather than competition, affinity rather than alienation, a spirit of sharing rather than one of rugged individualism. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out that one of the seminal experiences that Sebastian Younger encountered was spending time with indigenous communities, specifically, some sports teams from the Navajo Nation. And so what that kind of allowed him to see, provide a contrast for our American society, where we think that we are the most advanced and developed. But our advancement and development often looks like alienation and often looks like exploitation. And so we think that that our society, our Eurocentric American individualist society is more advanced. But actually, some of the things that provide healthy community are practices that have existed for millennium and were destroyed by American society when American society basically enacted genocide against Native communities and the indigenous folks of this land. And so, basically the human society has already and always known the method whereby we can create community and create a space for healing and interdependency, even despite war. Wars existed for a long time, but PTSD is relatively new, at least in terms of the huge rate of it. And that's because we think that our society has advanced to the point where people are independent, but that independence is alienation. And our inability to see that for what it is really because of the internalized white supremacy that we all see, where, that the American way is the better way, and the societies that were obliterated, the thought that they didn't have anything better to that they used that we could learn from.
Yeah. One of the things that again he talked about how we feel valued, and one of the things he talked about, and I watched one of his YouTube videos, was about 19-year-olds. And when I think of 19-year-olds, I remember myself as a 19-year-old. I didn't know where I fit. I didn't know. My job was to go to school or to go to work or whatever, but it wasn't a real satisfying thing. It was just, making money or preparing to make money. But he talked about 19-year-olds. I just love this quote. And he said that for 19-year-olds that are addicted to combat, it's like a drug, he said. The drug, and this is his direct quote now, the drug of being absolutely necessary to 30 other men who are absolutely necessary to you. I think that's something that we once had, evidenced by, where the heck, I'm lost. But anyway, that's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah, being seen and being valued is something that is such a key part of healing of trauma. Whether it's soldiers coming back from war, or just people who have been traumatized by the fact that there's so much pain in our modern American society. I'm thinking about a book, The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk, who's done a lot of research on trauma and PTSD. And he talks about the 4 fundamental truths of healing. And the first fundamental truth is our capacity to destroy one another is matched by our capacity to heal one another, right? And so being able to see people and support their healing is important. It also says that language gives us the power to change ourselves and others by communicating our experiences. But if you aren't in a community where you're able to comfortably communicate those experiences, it subverts healing. It also says we have the ability to regulate our physiology, including some of the involuntary functions of the body and brain. And lastly, we can change the social conditions to create the environments in which children and adults can feel safe and where they can thrive. And so, this interdependence and this communal spirit of everyone being seen and everyone being valued and everyone being looked at as I need to depend on you, is something that not only creates value in the self, but it also creates the necessary conditions for healing. And so that's why when a lot of veterans come back and they lose that interconnectedness and they feel that sense of isolation, you can have all the Veterans Day parades you want and all the free Applebee steaks or whatever, trinkets that they throw towards veterans. But honestly, what a lot of veterans, and I would say a lot of just people in general, need is an interconnectedness that allows true healing of the pain that we all go through because of some of the various forces that traumatize us all.
Yeah, that I wasn't going to go here yet, but I mean that really segues nicely into. Um, I was just reading this week about Dak Prescott, the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. Now apparently he's been injured. I don't know, but this was before the injury, and what the background is that his brother had committed suicide during this pandemic, that he was home alone and committed suicide. And Prescott said that he was depressed. And Skip Bayless, I guess, who's a commentator on one of the, I think ESPN, chastised him. I mean, he basically said, you can't do this. You know, you're an NFL player. You can't admit vulnerabilities. You have to be so powerful. And Dak Prescott said something I think is really powerful, and it goes right to what you were just saying. He said, our adversities, our struggles, what we go through is always going to be too much for ourselves, and maybe too much for even one or two people, but never too much for a community or too much for the people in the family that love you. So you have to share these things. I mean, that's just what you were talking about.
Yeah, and I think that reaction, that Skip Bayless reaction of you're a sports star, you got to be strong, you cannot show your emotions, that's classic toxic masculinity, that's classic patriarchy. And I think that is such a major part of what creates so much trauma in American society. You know, I'm looking at this quote that I wrote down earlier from Bell Hooks, The Will to Change. And it says, patriarchy as a system has denied males access to full emotional well-being, which is not the same as feeling rewarded, successful, or powerful because of one's capacity to assert control over others. So we value the ability to control, right? We as a society say the ability to control yourself, control your emotions, control the things around you. That is what is expected of men. And so what ends up happening is that's not the way, you know, we're supposed to be wired. And so it creates trauma, it creates you know, an unfair expectation for men to not share their vulnerabilities, which, you know, it doesn't go away. Usually what happens is it ends up, you know, reflecting as, you know, violence and abuse. And typically that violence and abuse is against women, it's against children, it's against other people who are facing the various oppressions, which create this sense that the men can get away with this abuse. Without any repercussions. And so that, you know, when I hear about that response from Skip Bayless, that, you know, that response right there from Skip Bayless of saying you need to be strong and you can't share your emotions, that is the same type of toxic masculinity that is one of the things that is so traumatizing to our society. And I have to, you know, I do have to make this one segue. You know, I'm sharing a lot of the things that I've been reading about and learning about recently. I do have to, you know, basically say that a lot of what I've learned is from being in community and being in a relationship with some really strong women who have helped me to learn these things, sometimes at great personal cost to themselves. And so once again, you know, women typically in our society will do a lot of the hard work of educating men, for doing the emotional labor for men that they often don't know how to do for themselves, and then not getting the credit for it. So I do have to, for anyone who out there who says, man, this guy kind of like gets it, like, no, I've just been lucky enough to be educated. So
yeah, I'm just going to go to a few of the comments in the from the Facebook thing. And Barbara talks about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then she adds, married men live longer than single men.
Yeah, that goes back to that concept of emotional regulation. So, which, you know, is about, you know, that concept of attachment theory. But really, like, a lot of times that, you know, a lot of times, unfortunately, that marriage relationship ends up, you know, the men are living longer because the women involved are doing a lot of the emotional labor to tend to the emotional health of the man, which is often an unfair power dynamic. So I would say that, that's definitely true. People need to be in community with each other, but there needs to be an effort to attend to who is doing the work, and who is getting the credit for creating the health and success of any relationship, whether it be a marriage relationship, or any time when people rely on each other and have that interdependence that we've noted is such an important part of health and well-being.
So here's some love coming to you. As I've said before, this is from Elizabeth. As I've said before, Dan Galvin, it would be good if we were able to clone you. Thanks for all you do. So that's pretty powerful stuff. Okay, so I wanted to go back to the 19-year-old thing, because I thought there was something pretty powerful in that, and I was talking about myself at 19. I don't think we do a very good job of making our young people feel like they are important members of our group. I was reminded of that this evening. I was sitting watching the Better Path Coalition had a phone-in session with Michael Mann, the climate scientist from Penn State, famous hockey stick guy. And he was asked questions by a bunch of young kids, and they were amazing questions. I mean, I don't think we do a good job of letting kids know how important they are. They're mostly just like little consumers taking up space, and we take care of them. But I don't think that's how humans evolved.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that the military-industrial complex exploits that, and I think that a lot of the recruitment efforts of the military see that. They see that young people, children, people who are entering the world, they don't feel safe and they don't feel secure. They don't feel important or valued. And so what they say is that, by joining the military, you can feel all of those things. You can feel the bonds of brotherhood. You can feel the bond, the security of financial stability, having a steady job, being guaranteed of meals. And so, this trauma of insecurity and this trauma of not being seen and not being valued, and not being seen as important, is something that the military, the American military, almost depends upon in order to swell the ranks. If communities had housing security, if communities had food security, there would be a lot of people who would not join the military. But the American war machine doesn't want that. And so the American war machine has a vested interest in making sure that people do not feel secure, that people do not feel valued, so that they can be presented with an alternative, albeit one that is a violent alternative, that does so often does damage, not just to the people joining, but also, just as I said, destroying communities overseas.
I guess what the other thing I was thinking of as you were talking right now is where I live, there are a number of Amish families. And one thing I'm always struck with when I go past is that you'll see young Amish boys and girls actually engaged in meaningful work outside their homes or at whatever. I mean, they're doing some things that are really important to the community, and it doesn't involve enlisting in the military or killing people or whatever. It's putting food on the table, splitting firewood, tending to horses. It's a different dynamic than many of the things I see kids in our community do, and that's watching TV or consuming.
Yeah, and that's a lifestyle that has existed before, right? That's a lifestyle that many indigenous communities for millennium, really used to create a harmony. And so when we, as Americans, view our way of life as inherently better because we have these material goods, well, look at the depression rates, look at the suicide rates. You know, as GDP goes up, you would think that happiness goes up, but that's actually not the case. Some of the happiest places are some of the places where people are more connected, and those are the types of communities that America has destroyed, whether by the genocide of the indigenous people of this land, or by just going and blowing them up in the Middle East or in Africa, or starving them with sanctions in South America.
The other thing that strikes me about what the Amish do, as opposed to what we do, is that basically childhood is like an apprenticeship for adulthood. These kids are learning to skills and I guess attributes that will serve them well when they reach adulthood. Whereas I don't know that our kids really get that too often. We don't prepare them for adulthood very well.
No, and in fact, we traumatize them. You know, in full disclosure, you know, I've recently been doing a lot of learning about myself and some of my own traumas from my past life, and most of them didn't come from my time in the military, but from going through the regular everyday traumas that so many kids go through in American society, in terms of housing insecurity, in terms of food insecurity. And so I've actually, in the past, you know, in past therapy sessions, my therapist has actually said, you know, you were actually ready for the bombs to be going off because you were already prepared for trauma by this early life that America creates. So America is preparing America, and the way that capitalism is set up, and the way that American isolationism and the patriarchy is set up, it really emotionally stunts, particularly men, but all people, you know, but in a self-serving way, right? That gets them ready for the cutthroat capitalist life, that gets them ready to subvert their own needs in order to continue to work and generate capital for the system, that gets them ready to be able to put a rifle in their hands and be ready to kill, because that's what they think constitutes, you know, honor and heroism. So yeah, I think that I don't think that American society is necessarily like failing to prepare children. I think it's actually preparing them for exactly what it wants them to be, which is, you know, advancing empire, advancing capital, and not advancing community or healing.
You sort of alluded to it. You talked about the increasing suicide rates and the trauma that the general population feels. But yet we often hear about returning vets, and we hear about the shockingly high suicide rate amongst returning vets. We also hear, you mentioned PTSD. You said that about half of the vets are reporting that they are disabled from post-traumatic stress disorder. What can we do to save the vets?
So I think take them off the pedestal. I think, you know, I think that American society pays a lot of lip service to respecting veterans, but it respects veterans in only a very particular way that actually creates more distance, because it says that your experience is inherently different than mine, and I'm going to label it for you, and I'm not going to allow you to talk about it and be honest about it. And so a lot of things that various folks that do work with moral injury and trauma will say is that a lot of veterans don't want people to tell them thank you for their service. They want people to say, would you like to tell me about your service? You know, for many years, I had a real, and still do, I have a real issue with, I don't want to say issue, but it feels weird when people tell me thank you for my service, because service has particular connotations, right? And it overlooks a lot, right? Because a lot of the people who are joining the military are joining the military because, you know, they need healthcare for their kids, or because they don't have stable housing, or because there's no other way to get into college. And just by saying like, you served us and you kept us safe, and thank you for that, overlooks some of the realities. And so I think that one of the things we can do to support our vets is to just give them the space to be honest, and give them the space to explore a narrative that is not the narrative that is dominant when we talk about veterans in America, because that defines their experience. And it also leans into that patriarchal understanding of, you know, not of having to be in control. I think another thing we could do for our vets is not make too many more of them, you know, create the social structures where people don't have to raise their hand and say, you know, I'm willing to pick up a rifle and kill someone in order to get a college degree, which is really the reason that I joined. So I think that that's something that we can do for our veterans, and really for everybody who, you know, is traumatized by any of the various experiences that modern American society creates in all of us, and then visits upon others.
I mean, that's a powerful statement, Dan. Younger said something similar. He said, sometimes we ask ourselves, can we save the vets? And he says, I think the real question is, can we save ourselves? What I like about that is it doesn't separate us from the vets. There's not that false thing that you were talking about, that, you know, you are different than me. No, it's like you and I and the rest of us are in this together. And how can we save us? Yeah, that's just some powerful stuff. I mean, if you want to react to that, go ahead. But I got another thing I would like to run by you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. You know, putting people on a pedestal does not actually respect them, and it does not actually help them to heal. And it's that same concept of patriarch is, you know, just telling people what they should think and feel, and not providing them the space to think or feel any other particular way. So I agree.
So I think a lot of folks know that, at least that are watching this, because it's part of the advertising for my campaign, is that I spent 36 years in the classroom, and part of that, the large majority of it was spent with delinquent and dependent boys. And I remember reading a book in 2009. It was by Dr. John Rich. It was called Wrong Place, Wrong Time. And it was basically, he was a trauma physician in Boston. And what he noticed over and over again was young Black men coming to the emergency room with gunshot wounds, stabbing wounds, all sorts of traumas. And the first thing he noticed was that almost universally, these young men were treated differently. And it was almost as if they were not victims, they were deserving victims. If, you know, I mean, it's like they must have been thugs, they must have been out in the street doing something illegal, whatever. That was the first thing. And so then he decided to start interviewing these young men, and found that no, that really wasn't the case. Often it was they were, as the book title suggests, in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then he defined what that was. And this is an amazing thing, because again, this pretty much describes the kids that I taught. Many of them were from urban centers, but also many of them were from rural. We didn't very often get suburban kids at the place where I worked. And what he said is, the wrong place was a community abandoned and divested of the financial and human resources that are needed for community members to remain safe. And the wrong time was the political environment that can only see a young man as sick or bad rather than injured. I mean, that's so much, to me, describes those kids. But when you're talking about the military guys coming back, it sounds a lot like that.
Yeah, and you referenced something similar, which is like the impact of systemic racism, right? You can't talk about trauma without talking about the impact of racism. So while we're talking about PTSD, there's also this concept of continuous traumatic stress, where people are not, or sometimes, you know, could be talked about as like a complex PTSD, where people are not given, it's not like an incident happens and then it's over. It's a series of incidents. And actually, some of the first work in terms of studying continuous traumatic stress was done in South Africa during apartheid. And there's this person called Gillian Straker, who worked at South Africa's Sanctuaries Counseling Team, that found that this apartheid system was so traumatizing to the people that lived under it, that the healing could not begin until they were given a new place to be that was not under that apartheid system. And if you look at, you know, the racial discrimination, racial segregation, and then the unequal, you know, the very unequal treatment of various communities by the law enforcement and the legal system, you know, we have a quasi-apartheid system in this country. And so the trauma is unequally distributed to Black and brown communities. And then what happens is that too often when you see the results of that trauma, that white supremacist thinking says that the reason is because there's something inherent about those communities, when actually it is a product of the apartheid system that we, as, you know, white American society, have allowed to continue and persist because it benefits us economically, if not in emotional health.
Yeah, I mean, even going beyond the apartheid system, I mean, I think it's kind of pointless to even debate that, you know, that we even have that. We do, of course. But the other thing we have going on is a lot of poor people, and they too are subject to traumas. And I think this pandemic has made that even more plain. I mean, 140 million Americans are in or near poverty. That was before the pandemic. And I very rarely saw a suburban kid in my classroom. In 36 years, I very rarely saw a suburban kid, but I often saw poor kids. I mean, it was because a lot of resources are kept from the poor.
Absolutely.
Schooling, yeah.
And we think that, or at least, you know, the modern political discourse thinks that by not investing resources to attend to that, we're somehow saving resources, when actually that compounds itself. Again, to go back to that book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, who studies trauma, basically they've seen that, to read a quote directly from it, it says, nearly every industrialized nation, with the exception of the United States, recognizes this impact of trauma and provides some form of guaranteed support to families. And economists have calculated that every dollar invested in high quality home visitation, daycare, and preschool programs results in $7 in savings on welfare payments, healthcare costs, substance abuse treatments, and incarceration, plus tax revenue going up because people are just doing better. And so by not providing that social safety net, we're not saving anything. We're creating trauma, which create additional costs. So we're bankrupting ourselves and our future.
I mean, that's great that you mentioned that, because I think it was right after I talked to you, I came home and I read this study out of British Columbia, where this social service agency identified 115 homeless people. And these were 115 homeless people that were not suffering from mental issues, mental health issues, or from drug or alcohol abuse. These were just folks that were homeless. And out of the 115 people, they selected at random 50 to give $7,500 to. Just no strings attached, just here's $7,500, let's see what happens. And what they found is that those 50 individuals were off the street quicker, like 3 months compared to 5 months. They no longer had food or housing insecurity. They were able to gain employment, And here's the thing that's related to exactly what you just said. The $7,500 saved about $53,000 to the taxpayers. I mean, because, you know, these people became productive. And so the $7,500 investment saved money.
Yeah, there's a real contempt in American society for poor folks, and there's this concept that if you give them something, they're going to squander it, because the reason they don't have it is because they do not have the wherewithal to make their own decisions, and that's a lie. Being
poor is hard work.
Yes, absolutely. And so, you know, the moment you give folks a little bit of agency and allow them to have a little bit more control, you know, they know what they need, right? And so once they know what they need to meet their own needs, just like I mentioned at the outset of this, like once your own needs are met, then you're able to turn outward. Right. And by turning outward, you're able to improve your community. You're able to cultivate, success in others around you. And so this notion that if we as a society meet these needs that are currently unmet, we're going to somehow remove their will to continue working. It just doesn't play out by studies like you cited. And
I mean, really, to me, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that was it.
Well, I mean, to me, you know, there hasn't been a day in my life where I didn't mind getting involved in productive work. I mean, you know, I love teaching. I right to the end. You know, I love doing it. I love working around the house here, you know, gardening and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think people want to be doing good things, good work. So yeah, invest in people. Don't buy this narrative. I love that. So changing gears again, Karen and I moved to Cherry Valley in 1982. And we bought our place from Elsie Baker. Elsie Baker and her husband, Dan, used to farm our place for decades. I mean, they had a small diversified farm. They had chickens and all this stuff, cows, dairy cows and berries and you name it. They were amazing folks. But in 1957, I love this story. Their barn was hit by lightning and it burned to the ground. And what happens now often is, you know, they say, oh, you have insurance, you know, you pay for someone to come in. But that's not what happened to Elsie and Dan. What happened to Elsie and Dan is immediately the following weekend, the entire community showed up and rebuilt their barn. They rebuilt their barn, I guess, because they were good neighbors, but they also rebuilt their barns, I think, because going back to what you were saying, I think the community recognized that Elsie and Dan were an important part of the community, that the rest of the community depended on Elsie and Dan, just like Elsie and Dan depended on the community. Just a powerful story.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that is the way in which so many societies have operated before basically American society and capitalism created these structures that separate people and create this system of I only do if, right? And people will only do if, rather than this just general understanding that like, no, we do for each other. Right. And that is the way that human society has operated for so long. That's the way, First Nations people operated in so many communities around the world where we go in and through imperialism and through global capitalism, we destroy these ways of life because these ways of life are not generating a profit for us. And so it's really like, it's capitalism and white supremacy, which is doing away with that interdependence that is just what most humans have done until we, as white America, destroyed it.
You know, this is the kind of conversation you don't normally hear in political campaigns. I mean, you are raising some really tough issues, and I know one of them we talked about right before we came on, and that was, you know, you're making some prescriptions here. You know, I mean, yeah, I talked about the $7,500 thing to the homeless. How do we pay for these changes you're advocating for? And
well, according to the Military Times, the biggest budget the Pentagon has ever seen, $700 billion, is now being passed in a bipartisan manner. It's far more in defense spending than our two closest competitors, China and Russia. And having been in the military and see where that money is spent, we're not getting value for it. You know, continuing to build bombs and tanks and these weapons of destruction is not how we're going to gain actual development in terms of success and happiness and thriving. And so I would say that, you know, the money's there. It's just being spent to destroy rather than create. And again, I have to say, you know, and you talking about, you know, all the things that I've been thinking about sharing, I'm lucky I've had people in my life, particularly women who have educated me, again, sometimes to their benefit and sometimes at great cost. And so that has to be acknowledged, and that has to be said, that I have learned from others who are often not given credit.
Thank you for that. A couple more comments from the Facebook comment section. I'm not sure, some of these were a while ago, but Karen writes, continuous stress of when is the next meal?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's something definitely that the poor folks have to deal with all the time. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that Barbara is talking about the book Nickeled and Dimed in America, which is a powerful book.
I actually read it, and you know where I was when I read it? I was in Iraq.
Wow.
Yeah, had some time. Yep.
So that's pretty powerful stuff. Well, Dan, we're almost at that point. I want to give you an opportunity to sum up what you said, and then I'll finish up too.
I guess what I would say is that, you know, I'm glad that the campaign is advancing that concept of community, because community is how we heal, community is how we develop, and community is what veterans need. But really, what veterans need is to not have to go into the military to find that community, to stay at home. And develop that community, develop that healthy dependence and interdependence, and work to rebuild the barn and rebuild ourselves.
Yeah, that's I mean, that right there. You pretty much said what I was going to say. That's super. Yeah, this campaign is about community, about rebuilding the community, about grassroots democracy, not doing the bidding of multinational corporations that are in it to extract wealth and well-being from our community. So, Dan, I thank you so much for coming on this conversation. And believe it or not, we made it an hour. I mean, it's like we're a minute away. So I thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the platform to share. Once again, share things that I learned from others who often do not get the credit.
Thank you, Dan, and good night to everybody.